Okay, then let's make a start. Hello and welcome to today's Cyber Resilience 202 webinar. My name is Cy West, Director Customer Engagement, and I will be the moderator for today's session. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat room and we'll do our best to get through them all during the discussion phase at the end of the webinar. So Cyber Resilience 202 is an extension of our flagship National Cybersecurity Centre APMG accredited Cyber Resilience 101 course. If you haven't been lucky enough to participate in one of our 101 courses, then please do reach out to the team and we can arrange for you to join the next one that's will be delivered in your local region. So today it's all about bringing in interesting, exciting, innovative people and businesses, whether they're from the resilience team or from our partners. These sessions are typically tailored specifically for our brokers. And today, in this short but very impactful session, get ready to enhance your understanding of cloud security and empower your brokerage with the right measures to protect clients and stay ahead of this fascinating and ever-evolving digital landscape. So today's webinar will be delivered by our very own Graham Manzi, Senior Risk Engineer, and today's topic is on navigating the cloudscape. Graham, over to you.
Thanks, Si. Yeah, so today's topic, navigating the cloudscape, cyber insurance, and the great cloud migration. We see a lot of customers dealing with this. My name is Graham Manzi. I've been at Resilience for about 18 months. My background is in the military and secure communications and data specialist in the Royal Marines. After that, I worked as a cybersecurity consultant for a number of years, doing assessments of critical national infrastructure and some cloud-based systems. I've used the Cloud Security Alliance's Consensus Assessment Initiative questionnaire and other resources in reviewing some critical cloud-based applications and systems. I hold their certification in cloud auditing, and then I also have 2 SANS and GIAC certifications in Cloud Security Essentials and Public Cloud Security, which looks at the differences between some of the major or the big 3 providers in particular. So there's a lot of content to cover today, and then this is the agenda. First, we're going to talk through some of the kind of fundamentals so that we can understand key concepts, look at the benefits of cloud and migrating, some of the considerations when deciding whether it's worth it and how you might go about it, the move towards multi-cloud and what that means, the sort of so what from an insurance perspective, and then we'll open up for a bit of a discussion. So initially, there are 5 key characteristics to cloud computing. I'm not going to read the definition here, that's from NIST, but those 5 characteristics are being on demand, so you can have it when you want, network access, that it's accessible over the internet generally. The shared pool of resources is really one of the critical concepts, and then rapidly provisioned and released, so you can scale up and down as you need it. The 5th characteristic that isn't highlighted there is that it's measurable, so that the provider has some way of charging you for what you use, whether that's storage size or the bandwidth. But fundamentally, coming back to the shared pool characteristic, all clouds are really built on this concept of virtualization, which essentially means sharing one physical computer's resources among multiple virtual computers or machines, often called VMs. There are also like a number of different deployment models and service models that are worth understanding when trying to develop a deeper understanding of cloud computing. And we'll step through some of these now. So deployment models, there are a variety of different types. There are 3 main ones: public cloud, which is large organizations like AWS, Azure, and they build the infrastructure and manage it for you, and they give you access to those shared computing resources. And they also have a variety of different services that they'll offer in addition to that. Private cloud is kind of the other end of the spectrum, where you are going to build your a data center yourself and then virtualize a bunch of your devices and have it as a private cloud. Really, it's a single organization. There is a kind of subset of that called a community cloud, where there's a group of organizations that maybe work together, or and they're going to pool their resources to build this private cloud. So there are use cases for both of them, depending on how much control you want over the data in that infrastructure. And then finally, hybrid sits somewhere in between them, and really there's a bit of debate about definitions of whether hybrid and multi-cloud are really the same thing. But hybrid, you've got some private cloud, some public cloud, and probably, again, some degree of on-premise as well. At the moment, we see a lot of customers not just completely moving, but actually doing it in a gradual fashion. So you have multiple different types of cloud and on-premise infrastructure to support. Multi-cloud, I think, is slightly different in the fact that you may have not only on-premise and private and public, but you may also have different service model types, which we'll touch on as well. So that I think multi-cloud captures that, or you may be using multiple different providers. That's the other kind of interpretation of that. I quite like this. These 5 models come from the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, whereas the US NIST one has 4. It's the public, hybrid, private, and community, whereas the NCSC community is part of private. And they've also added hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, whereas NIST sees hybrid as a variant of multi-cloud. The one that is distinct to the NCSC is edge computing, which definitely has a number of use cases, particularly where there may not be sufficient internet connection, or they want to do some pre-processing or bandwidth issues, or pre-processing of data before it's sent to the cloud for either performance or cost-related reasons as well. We'll touch on that a bit more shortly. The service models, again, I'll talk at the opposite ends of the spectrum and then come through the middle. Software as a service is generally more specific functions, whether that's a CRM, customer relationship management tool that people are quite familiar with Salesforce or HubSpot, or HR like Workday. It tends to be an application designed for a specific purpose. And then that's run as a service where you just consume that function that it helps you achieve. Infrastructure as a service sits at the other end of the spectrum, and really it's a provider supplying those shared resources, but you'll be responsible for managing them. It's often the most similar to on-premise, and is used as kind of part of a lift and shift to cloud strategy as well. Platform as a service sits in the middle, and really is a bit of a spectrum as well, depending on the platform itself and how much you choose to do, or how much responsibility you want to hand over to the provider. There is another one called serverless, or function as a service, which sits somewhere between SaaS and PaaS. It really is not actually serverless. It just means that the provider is managing the servers on your behalf, and they only exist while they execute your code, and then they're destroyed. It's useful for automation, or aligning with like microservice architectures as well. And then finally, containers, another big technology that's helped expedite this cloud migration, or as a way to make it a bit easier, such as Docker or Kubernetes for container orchestration. That sits somewhere between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service as well. And again, there's almost a spectrum within container services in terms of how much responsibility you want to have in terms of container orchestration or the management of those containers, or if you want to have it more as a service to the left end of this, like more specific, probably less functionality or options, but more management and less burden on you by outsourcing it to the provider. However, in summary, the security implications of each of these options are sort of discussed and defined by the shared responsibility model, which is on the next slide. But a cloud provider is often going to be more likely to be capable of meeting security goals at scale than any one individual customer. So whichever service model you are using, you will need to trust your provider, and then probably conduct some assurance as part of that. This is the shared responsibility model. You can see that in on-premise architecture, you're responsible for everything, including physical security. For infrastructure as a service, the provider is going to build the data center and manage the hosting components like the hypervisor and things like that, and sort of the physical networking side of things. But there's quite a lot of responsibilities that remain with the customer. However, at the other end, SaaS, very specific purpose. A lot of the responsibility lands on the provider in sort of building this service and in the management of it. However, the customer is always going to be responsible for the data that goes in and the configuration that is available to them within that service. Again, you can see PaaS sits somewhere in here. Again, the application that you build within a platform is likely to be your responsibility, but some controls will be yours and some will be the provider's, depending on the type of platform and what you choose to build and where it sits on that spectrum. It's quite platform specific and can be a bit nuanced as well. Yeah, and as I mentioned, you'll always be responsible for ensuring that the service can meet your security needs, the configuration of the services that you've chosen, and then deciding what data you choose to put in that within that solution as well, management of it. Yeah. So as I mentioned, there are the 5 characteristics that we went through, the different deployment and service models. They're all useful ways of thinking about the various different types of cloud out there and the services and products that these vendors are creating for customers. Yeah, and in summary, one of the main benefits is to delegate as much responsibility for security and management as you can based on your requirements. And that's part of a kind of cloud first approach. And you often want to start with SaaS and then move to other models depending on your requirements. So moving on from that kind of benefit, some of the other benefits of moving to cloud, really, they're economical benefits. Rather than having to invest in building a data center and buying all the computing components, you move away from that capital expenditure model to an operational expenditure model, subscriptions and things like that. It's just, it just means that you don't have to have that lump sum to get started as well. So it can enable you to get going more easily at the beginning. And then the other benefit is that once you are potentially within a cloud, you can, or a cloud service, there are opportunities to identify and then potentially eliminate unneeded resources, as part of cost management and just general waste reduction that are all going to make the whole technology you're trying to support more economical from a business perspective. There are a lot of customers we work with out there that have seasonal elements to their business, or there are peaks and troughs to the demand put on their business. In a traditional architecture, they'd have to build enough capacity to meet those peaks, and then you have this unused resource for the rest of the year. With cloud, you can scale up and down, depending on the demands, and you can ideally do so dynamically. So it enables you to have your supply match demand dynamically, and then leveraging some degree of automation to make that process all the more seamless. And there are ways to scale horizontally and vertically, but we won't dig into them right now. And then finally, speed. If you want to try something new or innovative, there's an opportunity to do it at somewhat of an arm's length, maybe within a separate account that you manage. You may want to create a duplicate of your environment for testing, or to experiment and change how you're going to manage data or the application or system architecture that you've chosen. You may look for alternatives. AWS, for example, or Amazon Prime Video, they had a serverless architecture to kind of get started, and then they managed to create a 90% cost reduction by moving to a more traditional monolithic architecture. So there's a lot of ability to redesign based on the flexibility that cloud provides you, and to do it quickly at speed. Excuse me. The other security benefits, there's quite a lot here to unpack, but easier management, centralized management of resources, rather than having to look in different places to manage things. You just got it's slightly easier to have oversight and control of infrastructure and the various different services you use within one provider's platform or the products and services you may be using. There are often also built-in integrations, capabilities like APIs or pre-built connectors that make it easier to combine data from various different sources. And this includes more advanced cloud native security technology, which we'll touch on in a minute. And then again, data management in the cloud, it's slightly easier to meet regulatory and compliance requirements by leveraging tools like cloud security posture management, which we'll touch on in the multi-cloud section as well. I've already mentioned some of the benefits of automation in minimizing human error. You can create dynamic inventories or look at everything that might be in your account in sort of real time and what it's doing, the resources it's consuming, and the cost of it. You can leverage infrastructure as code to build things and tear them down very quickly as well, which ties into the DIE versus CIA model. So CIA can confidentiality, integrity, and availability of managing devices and data that you care about the security of. You can potentially move to a DIE model, which is distributed. So rather than having one device, you spread it out over multiple devices. Immutable, another benefit in cloud, or slightly easier to achieve in cloud, where that's a backups are often mentioned as immutable in submissions now. Essentially means it's not able to be overwritten. So it's quite a strong control as well. And then finally, ephemeral, which means a device that's short-lived. You only have to look after it or run it while you need it. And then after you no longer need it, you can get rid of it. So the DIE model is kind of thinking of computing resources more like cattle that you can get rid of when you no longer need them, versus pets, where you have to look after the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the security of those the pets, your computing resources and things like that. And then security automation and response. SOAR. There's a lot of potential to automate response to issues that you might identify that cloud enables or makes slightly easier. Although you've got to be careful what you're doing. Similarly, recoverability, building, I already mentioned immutable backups and the strength that control creates. Having different versioning is slightly easier as well. And rolling back, that whole process can be slightly better. But I think one of the other critical parts is an ability to tag things slightly more easily as well, so that you can understand what devices and resources and services you're using within your cloud environment and what business function they support. And that will help you understand what your minimal viable company or organization might be in the event of an instance. And you can say, right, well, we need to spin back up our finance and order management system first, and then we can worry about some of the HR or whatever other systems at a later date. And that way you're reducing the amount of different things that your response team or your IT infrastructure or security team are going to have to rebuild in the event of a catastrophic incident. And finally, the last one, modernization, is probably the most important one on this slide. One of the main drivers in moving to cloud for those benefits we mentioned is there are a lot of technical debt out there and a lot of critical business functions that are still provided by legacy technology. It's often referred to end of life. Now you've got a few sort of strategies and options that you might choose to do. You either retain it and do nothing, you retire it, either you're going to stop doing it, drop it, or you may rehost, which essentially means lift it from on-premise to cloud, lift and shift, and put it into your infrastructure as a service. Or you may choose to repurchase, shop and drop, that's often referred to. So drop or retire the old technology that supported the function and purchase a new, often a SaaS product that will do the same function, and then just back up the legacy information you need and refer to it if you might need it. And then finally, replatforming. It's probably one of the most onerous ones, where you need to lift the existing architecture or lift the existing systems and reshape them to make them fit for purpose to be put into the cloud. Either refactoring applications, redesigning how systems work, and so on. However, there are certain legacy systems that are simply not compatible with cloud environments, or where the cost and complexity of migrating them just might not be justifiable. And that's where you may just need to retain them and put additional protections around them, but trying to minimize those systems as much as possible, and ideally have some plan for retiring them eventually. Speaking of planning, this is a slide I often discuss with some of our customers on our edge calls. All businesses are increasingly technology businesses. Ford Motor Company, famously has more software engineers now than mechanical engineers. And information security is often somewhat of the canary in the coal mine in identifying critical business functions that might be reliant on legacy or risky technology or processes. However, everything in this diagram really flows from the top left in the business strategy. So while security and risk management may be identifying these issues, and we can address them by patching and continual efforts. But really, if we shift that problem left and have a clear plan and a strategy to not create technical debt that our organization is dependent on, that reduces the burden on security or your IT infrastructure teams to fix these issues or keep them going longer. And really, business leaders need to acknowledge and understand that more and more business functions are increasingly dependent on technology, and it's not just an IT and security issue, it's a cross-functional approach is needed to this. And that business strategy will help shape the architecture of the IT and even the security solutions you might plan, and then how your compliance obligations feed into what you're going to approve and so on, and then any assurance pieces that you may have as well. There's an interesting phrase in terms of this whole modernization and having a plan piece is technical debt. A lot of companies are reliant on this technical debt is the phrase, but attackers can often be considered the technical debt collectors, and there's a lot of truth to that argument. So the more that you can have a plan and a strategy to reduce technical debt, the less the debt collectors will be coming after you, hopefully. We mentioned some of the critical cloud security technologies. I'm going to step through these reasonably quickly. Organizational policies are different from sort of traditional concepts of written policies like acceptable use and things like that you may have to acknowledge. These policies are technical controls that restrict who or what can access which resources in or assets within your cloud environment. So a more technical control than a people or process one. Organizational policies apply to entire organizational units, which may include different accounts, like your test account that I mentioned, or finance. You may have one account for finance or one account for whatever different business function. You can control all of those different accounts through one organizational policy, so it makes it a little bit easier to manage them. Flow logging is essentially network monitoring, looking for the connections and traffic between systems, services, and devices, and it records the sort of information you would want to build a baseline of acceptable traffic, so you can then investigate when there's maybe something going wrong. Private endpoints are very useful in preventing traffic having to navigate the internet. It's slightly easier as well to access some of the other services, like the container services I may have mentioned earlier, rather than having to, or storage services or key management services, rather than having to go on the internet. This is a device almost, or a service that you can put into your virtual private network to route that traffic so that all the data stays within your virtual environment. Cloud VPNs, as I mentioned, there's a lot of sort of multi-cloud hybrid architectures out there where you have some on-premise, some private cloud, some public cloud, and various other bits and pieces, and you may need to connect them all together. Virtual private networks is the way to connect and ensure that data is encrypted in transit so that it's not visible. And there's a lot of different ways to connect on-premise to cloud. That's a whole topic. It could be a webinar in and of itself. How you go about that requires specialist knowledge, and it's definitely something that's easy to misconfigure or get wrong or not adhere to best practices, or to potentially lose some of the benefits of going to cloud by creating a connection to, or maybe even making your existing on-premise infrastructure that little bit more vulnerable. Encryption keys. Encryption keys are going to essentially control who gets access to what data. you're going to have to decide how much trust you want to put in your provider and who's going to manage the keys. It's a lot easier to have the provider manage it, but for some data, you may not want to give up that responsibility. However, there's a lot of opportunities for key management to go wrong. People very rarely go after breaking, or attackers very rarely try and break encryption. It's so much easier to get the key, and then you've got access to it. And then finally, web application firewalls or general network management things, appliances as well. These might have been quite expensive to purchase traditionally. That capital expenditure might have been quite significant. Doesn't necessarily mean it's cheaper to use them in the cloud, but it's more of that operating OpEx model where it's a subscription service and you pay for what you use. Great way to protect your web servers and just reduce some of that potential attacks that they might be subject to. It also helps with that sort of distributed architecture design as well. I mentioned key management. I want to just reiterate this point again. Yeah, the keys are literally the keys to the kingdom. There are various different stages of key lifecycle and management, and each one of these presents an opportunity to get it wrong. So, when you're changing the key or backing it up, each one is where the attackers may look for weaknesses in that process or how that stage is managed in order to retrieve the key to get access to the data you're trying to protect. There are instances as well of almost ransomware incidents where your cloud infrastructure may be encrypted because using key management services that the cloud provider makes available to you. Someone encrypts your stuff with a key that they've built, and then they've deleted it and kept the only copy. Again, generation and establishment, even if you want to use your own keys, at some point you're going to have to import them into the system. That may be a time where it goes wrong, as they're stored on your device that you're uploading it from. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong here, so it's worth calling that out specifically as well. Benefits. In summary, the main benefits are improved efficiency, opportunities for innovation, and to modernize existing technology or leverage modern security solutions or other solutions as well. However, it's not all benefits. There are certainly some considerations that you need to take into account when you're considering your migration or what you are going to migrate. The first one's compliance. There are some industries and things like, maybe critical national infrastructure, or like a nuclear power plant, where you're never going to leverage, or do some run certain operational systems using public cloud services. It wouldn't make sense, from a risk-based approach, that wouldn't be practical. It's too much risk. And then the other one being sort of data sovereignty, where we see certain providers are simply it's not possible to use them within certain countries because they don't have a data center in that region, so they don't feel comfortable in letting their citizens or businesses leverage those services. It's worth bearing that in mind when you're choosing your provider and making sure you aren't breaching any local legislation. Internet access, we mentioned edge computing earlier on. There are certainly some locations where the internet connection is not going to be, sufficiently strong or fast or reliable to leverage cloud computing benefits. However, you may decide to host some of your provider's services on your on-premise or private cloud to either pre-process for performance or computing performance or cost-related issues, or just to ensure that those services are available even in the event of an internet outage. Performance, there are some applications that have really high performance requirements or latency requirements where are better serviced by on-premise hardware. And however, Basecamp's a good example of this. They put a lot of effort into migrate from existing on-premise architecture into the cloud to save money in terms of that capital expenditure. But when they looked into it, they decided actually the operating costs were now higher and they could save substantial money by going back on-premise and building their own data center, which they did. And then they migrated out of the public cloud, which is quite an unusual migration. However, it's worth stating that the whole process of modernizing their existing monolithic applications into more modern refactored architectures and containerizing different applications. That whole process improved efficiencies and modernized their technical and reduced some of their technical debt, so that when the process to move into the cloud was maybe substantial and had to be done iteratively and was quite a substantial exercise, because of all that hard work that they had done to move, they could move back into into an on-premise migration more easily because of that refactoring and reshaping that they had done of their technology and systems. And that doesn't mean they said they wouldn't still use public cloud to innovate for some of the benefits we mentioned previously as well. Expertise, there's just so much to try and stay abreast of. There are different vendor technologies, different configurations. There's different skill set for on-premise, public, private cloud. There's just so many different things. It's very hard to have them all in-house. So you're going to need to factor that in and understand what the human capital that you might need to have to conduct a migration or to continually manage it once you've migrated as well. And then finally, lock-in. This is another one that's worth kind of emphasizing a little bit. As businesses become more dependent and functions are more dependent on technology, if you do adopt the cloud-first approach where you look for SaaS tools first for each function, often there is a degree of lock-in that comes with an as a service because you have less responsibility and therefore less control. The lock-in can be when you're trying to then look for other providers that might do the same thing. How portable is your data? Ideally, you would want to avoid this, but the reality is that some of the benefits of having a lock-in outweigh the disadvantages, and that's illustrated on this slide here. Ideally, we would have a service that was highly portable, easy to move vendors, and offered high value. More often than not, we see this one in the top left, where there's a lot of value in using this SaaS tool, but it's quite difficult to extract your data. It's almost by design. Very easy to subscribe to something, much harder to unsubscribe and get out of it by design. They often make that process quite sticky. There are some sort of legal and contractual elements there, and it's something you can investigate before you move in. However, also common to see things that are either highly portable, so easy to move, lots of different providers, a competitive space, but they maybe offer slightly less value. Ones where they're offering a lot of value, they can afford to make it a little bit more difficult for you to move. And then really the only one that you really want to avoid are things that are low value and offer low portability. I mentioned the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Controls Matrix. It's on the 4th version, and their consensus assessment initiative questionnaire that I've leveraged as part of third-party risk management in the past. There are 8 questions, all related to interoperability and portability of data when assessing cloud services, and providers like AWS and whatnot. They often publish the answers to these questionnaires in the Security, Trust, Assurance, and Risk Registry, the STAR registry. And we'll link to that. We'll send you a link to that in the chat towards the end of the presentation, along with some other bits and pieces that I've referenced. Yeah, so I think there is a somewhat of a mistaken belief that moving to cloud will solve all your problems, and really that's not the case. It moves problems around. You're going to have new problems. I've got one of the customers I work with. They were saying, "Oh, we're not going to use this piece of technology that supports this business function anymore. We're going to buy a SaaS tool, and that'll be great, and we can remove it from our risk register." We said, yes, that is great. That's absolutely the right thing to be doing. However, you also move that risk. You're creating a dependency on this third-party service. You need to do some due diligence on it and manage it and make sure you have conducted some assurance that, and a risk-based approach to understand the data protection and impact assessment of putting the data that you're talking about in there. Need to have that risk-based approach to assurance to provide a lot of assurance for very important things, and maybe you can get away with a little bit less for some less important data. One of the other concepts here, one of the other problems is separation, something you definitely want to look into as well. The questionnaire I mentioned also has far more questions around separation of data. There are a variety of different types. You want to ensure different customers' data is properly separated. If you're using those shared resources, the last thing you want is data flowing between customers, different workspaces or projects. You want finance to be separate from HR, for example. Your control plane, where you maybe have system administrators managing your cloud environment. They want to access some things, but not necessarily the data within the cloud. The data plane or that the environment. And then there are other identity and access management mechanisms of separation as well, setting permissions and policies based on role-based access control as well. And then there's within application as well. So within a configuration of a SaaS tool, for example, there are different ways you may want to separate users and access the data in there too. Finally, that leaves misconfiguration. Probably one of the most common causes of data breaches in the cloud. People may have heard of exposed S3 buckets or data storage repositories being publicly available to the internet. You just need to navigate to the right address. As I mentioned, having the expertise to manage environments can be quite onerous, and they're almost designed to be easy for you to get started. All these providers want it to make it easy for you to get started, but those default configurations are very unlikely to be sufficiently secure to meet your business needs. So the defaults definitely need to be reviewed, and you want to take on some more of the management of the configurations to make sure that you're addressing the common issues. Don't try and figure it out yourself. There are benchmarks and standards for all of these things. Center for Internet Security, CIS, they have benchmarks for cloud and other mobile and all sorts of bits and pieces. CISA in the US, and then the NCSC in the UK. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of great resources out there. Don't try and figure it out yourself. Listen to what the experts have to say, and again, automate where you can. I've mentioned, yeah, this is the NCSC have really improved their guidance on cloud security. There's a lot of the topics I mentioned there. That a lot of the content in this webinar has been informed and guided by some of the resources there. It's definitely something to have a look at. And again, we'll post a link to that in the chat at the end. Ultimately, the decision to migrate to cloud needs to be kind of risk-based, decided based on what function it is you're trying to replicate, and so on. And ultimately, it needs to be driven by cost to some degree as well. What makes the most business sense, and then have some kind of strategy and plan to do it in a thoughtful process, not just, oh, like we're just going to move everything to cloud now. Have a plan. And have a plan to step back if something doesn't go well as well. Leading on to multi-cloud. Now this slide taken from the SANS multi-cloud survey. More and more businesses are operating across multiple clouds, whether that is Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, GCP, Oracle are sort of fourth biggest one. They're growing rapidly as well. Each one is slightly different. And you can also see lots of the number of accounts growing within each vendor, not only a large number of different vendors, but within each vendor, the number of accounts growing, as well as test accounts are created, or different accounts for different business functions, a test environment, a development environment, a pre-production, production. There could be lots of different accounts spawned, particularly if you enable users to create different accounts for different purposes. So there is definitely a large growth in the number of accounts. And then also a lot of companies have a growth strategy through merger and acquisition. And I don't think the business teams necessarily, when they're looking at this on paper, don't necessarily consider the differences in terms of technology estate. So if someone is entirely in AWS and all their expertise are based in AWS, acquiring a business where everything is in Google and using Google hosting solutions, you're going to have quite a process in merging those together, and there's going to be a fairly substantial amount of time where you're going to need to run the two entities separately as you eventually merge them. So even if the business has plans to cut down and merge teams together, the reality may be more complicated than that, given the differences between and the expertise required for each different vendor, for example. Single sign-on solutions definitely help where you do have those different cloud vendors. You can do single sign-on and federation of identity to have one of these providers as the identity manager. So you're reducing some of the burden, which is great. So you don't have to manage two user accounts for each vendor. However, you then create a potential single point of failure or a reliance on one vendor. People may have heard of Okta, an identity as a service provider, and they had an incident not too long ago as well. So very important. Identity is the new perimeter is a common phrase we hear, and there's definitely a lot of truth to that. Managing and comprehensive identity access management controls are fundamental to good security in and outside of the cloud, but it does create a single point of failure or point of increased risk. So you need to make sure you're doing your risk management there and reducing the misconfiguration or other threats to those identities. I mentioned VPN connections and connecting private clouds and on-premise and public clouds all together. And that's definitely something that businesses are facing here on this third point. There's different expertise required for each one, and you may have different teams. It's a complicated bit. There's lots of different ways of how you might connect these things together. Some are good, some are not good, and it's definitely an area where it's worth taking expert advice. And probably you may need to start with something less optimal to get going, but you could always migrate to different forms of connection that maybe bring in additional security benefits as well. And then finally, different SIEMs, so security incident event management technology. You may have one for on-prem, private, and public cloud, and then maybe for different public clouds you might have. So you could easily see you having 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 tools here, and having different tools for different areas of your estate that are all fundamentally connected together is going to restrict your visibility and your ability to enrich your logs and monitoring technology. So you ideally a single solution that pulled all those things together is the best approach. But again, you may have done that and then have a new acquisition, and then you've got another one to manage again and then integrate as well. Some of the technology solutions that you may have started seeing on submission documents that might help with some of the issue. I'm going to step through some of these now. CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, several benefits, providing additional visibility. It's a solution that helps organizations manage and secure access to cloud-based applications and services. That could be SaaS tools, PaaS platforms where things are being built, and even infrastructure as well. So all sorts of different service models, and potentially to on-premise or private cloud resources as well. It's essentially a proxy, a device that sits between users and the cloud applications that they're using, and it's able to inspect the traffic to inform the cloud and identify and mitigate some security risks. They've got a variety of features. I mentioned visibility, providing control of who can access what, and it's that single point which helps enable that, and then protect the data that you may have in these resources from being exfiltrated as well. Some of the issues are, again, it's creating a potential single point of failure. If your CASB goes down, you may not be able to access any of your cloud resources, which would be problematic to say the least. And then as it's that sort of single point of failure, there can be some issues with latency or bandwidth and trying to put everything through this single choke point. Again, balancing security and functionality a little bit there. Another term you may hear is SASE or SASE Edge, Secure Access Service Edge. There are a variety of kind of technologies that kind of pull this concept together. We've already discussed CASB, the Access Security Broker. Secure web gateways, they're essentially a bit like firewalls, filtering and blocking malicious traffic. And then zero trust is another strategy we hear quite a lot about, rather than implied trust of being within the perimeter of the network. We're going to assume that these devices are compromised and verify before we permit access to resources and applications. And then SD-WAN, software-defined area network, secure and reliable network connectivity between users, devices, and applications. Zero trust and SD-WAN might be a useful way to connect all those various different private, on-prem, public cloud that we mentioned as well. Again, anything software defined, slightly easier to tag things to understand what that device is and what should be permitted. And then tagging allows you to have a better inventory and identify what that device might be doing, and then manage it more easily as well and make changes. Finally, cloud security posture management. Similar to the management benefit we mentioned at the beginning, I've said several times, being able to inventory and understand dynamically in real time what is within your environment, looking for any discrepancies between that, and then understanding, having it all in a central location, understanding the cost is another really effective way to understand what's happening in your environment, identifying what's going on. Monitoring solutions, pulling those flow logs into tools for it like CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and then having it presented as part of your security posture management tool in AWS Security Hub, for example. Again, rather than having all those different tools, pulling it into a single place, tying it in with the other inventorying that you may have, this can expedite. Again, it's that centralization and other integrations that can be particularly powerful. In addition to monitoring network traffic, understanding identities, reviewing permissions and policies, and implementing principles of least privilege. Again, the cloud security posture management tools can really help you do that. Making sure that you're aligned with security best practices and the frameworks and things that I've mentioned already. It can be quite an onerous task for internal teams. It can be automated. You can look at all the resources in your environment based on your inventory and see whether they meet PCI, DSS, or whatever framework it is you're trying to align to make sure you can process card payments within that card data holder environment. And it's a very useful piece of information for insurers as well, which we'll touch on. Tying all these things together, when you identify an issue, one of the other benefits of being cloud, as we mentioned, is automation. That might be automated response to make sure that if someone has more permissions than they should, or the permissions have been changed, they're reset, or devices are doing things they shouldn't be, they're isolated. Again, you can automate a lot of that response, or again, something's been configured, it's no longer compliant. Well, we can just automatically reconfigure it and make it compliant with the standard that we're looking to be aligned with. Lots of different clouds out there, the public, private, SaaS tools for different functions like HR, accounting, customer management, enterprise resource planning. SaaS tools for those different functions are very useful. A platform as a service for building and developing things, save yourself some effort versus doing it in infrastructure as a service, or less responsibility on you. However, infrastructure as a service is definitely useful for legacy lift and shift, or certain functions that you want more management over, but using a risk-based approach. And again, federation between cloud providers can make that using multiple clouds much easier. But as I mentioned, keys can be a real problem there. It's easier to just hard code a key in your application, but it makes life a lot easier for attackers. So rather than having hard-coded credentials, you're much better off having services that enable user identities to pass between different vendors as well. Finally, the so what from a kind of insurance perspective. We are seeing attackers adapt to customers being more cloud-based. SVR, also known as APT29, Midnight Blizzard, or Cozy Bear, infamous for the SolarWinds supply chain attack. We're seeing them move targeting cloud infrastructure via service accounts or programmatic accounts or dormant accounts. Service accounts or programmatic accounts because there's no MFA enforced, or there are poor joiners, movers, and leavers process for legacy accounts. Things that we can do here are have long, complex passwords or potentially canary service accounts that should never be used. So if there's any use of them, that should set alarm bells off. They're also looking to enroll devices to circumvent controls. So having a control to validate devices before they're permitted access to cloud resources, definitely an important control there too. We also speak to customers that use IP blocking to say we can only access from certain countries. Well, these attackers are using what's called residential proxies to make it look like they're one of your employees coming from a residential IP address. So not as an effective control as many people think. This ties into one of the slides from our Cyber Resilience 101 that we see is that attackers and defenders, there's this sort of symbiotic, slightly lagged response as one adapts to the other. Traditionally, this would be sharper teeth for a predator or better eyesight for the prey. For attackers and defenders, this might have been device accounts without MFA. So now we're implementing MFA that makes it harder for the attacker. So they're either looking for exposed vulnerabilities instead, or supply chain attacks like SolarWinds, or even MFA. Not all MFA is created equal. We want to move away from SMS-based authenticate MFA to more secure application-based or biometric as well. So we're using not just two factors, but multiple as well. From an insurance perspective, how can we adapt? I think one of the three main bits, it's unrealistic to expect to have a deep technical knowledge of all the different things that we've discussed today. I wouldn't consider myself a specialist in any of these things, more of a generalist. There's just a growing dependence on multiple different cloud technologies, architectures, services, different vendors, and that rate of change is just rapid and accelerating. So we really need to focus on strategies and principles for securing our organizations, which are more general, versus tools and tactics that might be specific and solve a specific use case. As insurers, we have an opportunity to observe, aggregate and evaluate the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we see attackers using that are the cause of claims. And we can then leverage that information to understand the exposure of our insureds and our books of business to these emerging threats, and then try and be proactive rather than just reactive in advising our clients on what they maybe need to prioritize as part of their remediation. And then finally, we already see technology leveraged in the underwriting process to look at, particularly at resilience. I know we look at things like exposed credentials, potential vulnerabilities, remote access, things like that as part of our underwriting process. And there are other data sources here. For example, the Cloud Security Posture Management tool, we take some of the outputs from that. And we can then take that information from the threat intelligence and help make it relevant and orientate it to our clients, and then help them emulate adversaries to ensure that controls are effective and that they're trying to mitigate issues before they arise. Lastly, and that's exactly what we're doing at Resilience. We've got a connection and a partnership, connection with the AWS Security Hub, which is the Cloud Security Posture Management tool. We can see whether clients are configured to best practices, and we can use that data as part of our underwriting process. Similarly, for Microsoft Office 365, there's a tool that hits the Microsoft Security Graph API, and we're looking for information like using data loss prevention controls, whether the number of privileged accounts, whether MFA is enforced, and then whether mobile device management for that device enrollment piece I mentioned is implemented too. All of these save a client filling out a submission and answering a large number of questions, where we can actually just take this information directly from them and save them a lot of time and effort and put it into our underwriting process as well. And that really ties into our model of quantifying risk. Ultimately, all these are interesting data points, and each one we can raise these potential issues with our clients. We can, by expressing risk in financial terms, we can help break down the silos between finance, security, and risk managers, so that we're all talking about risk in financial terms to then lead on to prioritization. And that's where some of the inputs from these cloud security posture management tools can be discussed and say, well, if you implement this, it will buy down risk by this much. And then you can decide whether you want to treat the risk by moving it down or maybe transfer more risk. And it's part of that holistic cross-functional solution rather than just thinking of it as a IT responsibility. In summary, there's just a huge amount of knowledge that we might need to do. Expecting one person to have all this knowledge is completely unrealistic. It's going to be a team effort, and ultimately we'll want to work together to reduce the money that the bad guys are able to take from insureds as well. We can leverage existing data more effectively to accurately quantify the risk that our insureds are facing, and then we can use insurance as a tool to drive better security practices, again, to take money away from the bad guys and take a more carrot versus stick approach. A lot of content to get through there. Hopefully I've got through most of it. Open up to discussions now and any of the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Graham, for that. It's a truly fascinating insight into the complexities of the cloud landscape and some of the associated risks that businesses that are transitioning to the cloud, may face. So we do have a few questions. We have a short period of time. Any questions that we are unable to answer on the call today, we will respond to in the follow-up email. So we have one here, Graham. So this person, I've heard using infrastructure as a code is a cloud vendor agnostic approach to building things in the cloud. Is this correct, or should we be looking for something else?
Not really. Kind of, it depends. Infrastructure as code is often one of the big providers is Terraform. It's a way to build automatically using code to build infrastructure or devices and networks and all sorts of things in a cloud environment. It's often touted as vendor agnostic, but that's not true because you need one set of code and instructions for AWS, a different set for Azure, a different set for Google Cloud. So the same code cannot be vendor agnostic. You would need 3 sets of code for each vendor. So that isn't necessarily correct. So you got to be aware when people are saying that.
Excellent. Thanks, Graham. And we have another one here, and this is about the costs. I've heard that security monitoring costs in the cloud can be astronomical, particularly around getting logs into monitoring systems like a SIM, Security Information and Event Management System. I know we at Resilience are always talking about how you get the best bang for your buck. What's the situation here, do you think?
Yeah, that's very true. I think it depends. You maybe need to decide a little bit of what you're going to filter out beforehand. Again, you would want a specialist in the vendor you were going to use. The vendor or the vendor you might be using to build things in like AWS or Azure, they're going to make it incentivize you to use their native tools rather than exporting everything to maybe your preferred third-party tool. How you architect things to make sure that you're not and that measured characteristic of cloud computing, one of the things that they'll be measuring is the data flowing in and out of your cloud environment. So if you're exporting everything and large volumes of it for monitoring, that's going to be expensive. So cloud native tools or vendor native tools may be one option if you're willing to change provider. The other would be trimming what you send, or maybe being clever with your architecture so that your SIEM tool is hosted within the cloud environment so that you aren't shipping it in and out. You try and keep it contained where you can. They're all different ways to keep costs down.
Excellent. And I think we have time to squeeze one more in, Graham, and then we'll take the rest offline and then we'll finish up. So, okay, so for businesses pursuing cyber insurance, are there specific things that they should be able to demonstrate regarding their cloud security?
I think if we were to ask one thing, those cloud security posture management tools look at a number of different issues, like the entire configuration of that account or environment or devices within that and resources within that account or group of accounts. So you want to see whether things are configured or align with best practice. That's the whole point of the connectors, the data connectors we have with AWS, with 365. I know we're looking at other integrations with Defender for Cloud and leveraging third-party tools like Prowler and things like that. So cloud security posture management will give you a lot of information. Is everything configured in alignment with best practice? Is probably the one question to get started. That's the way I see. That's where I see the insurance industry focusing on understanding cloud risks. And again, it may save time from the client's perspective, filling out a large submission document when they can maybe just provide access to that best practices report. The only caveat to that is some features are free, but if you want more, you're going to have to pay for it more often than not, which is one of the issues we have maybe more widely in technology. Is security is a premium feature that you have to pay for, and really it shouldn't be, and we need to change the expectations there, and that government probably has a role in mandating that security features are included, but that's a separate issue.
Excellent. Thank you, Graham. We are over time right now, so we're going to stop there. Apologies, we haven't had time to go through all the Q&A, but we will respond to them in the follow-up email. I'd just like to thank Graham for an excellent session today, and thank you to everyone who joined the call today. I hope you enjoyed our Resilience 202 session. And as I look forward, we'll be running our next session towards the end of May, so keep a lookout for that. And that's going to be on cyber insurance, a new paradigm for securitization against adversarial risk. And that's going to be with our very own Rob Brown. So thank you very much today, and I look forward to seeing you all around the market. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.